What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you with yet another 2024-2025 NBA season look ahead. We are on to the Orlando Magic, and I'm lucky enough to be joined by a first-time guest, Fawzan Amir. We have talked for a couple years now. He's been on the Magic beat. He covers the Orlando Magic for the Sixth Man Show. You can find his Twitter handle and link to his Twitter, assuming it is up and running, which we hope that it will be, in the podcast and YouTube description, and he will shout it out at the end of the episode like we always force our guests to do. Going to get into all things Orlando Magic. This is really excited. Like I said, I've known him for a while. He's really, really good at what he does some film breakdowns, highlights, analyzes a whole bunch of stuff. So go check him out if you haven't already. His stuff's at the Sixth Man Show, and they're a wildly popular Orlando Magic podcast / outlet. I've listened to many of their podcast episodes. With that, though, I'll start rambling. Let's bring on Fawzan so we can talk about the 2024-2025 Orlando. Fawzan, thank you so much for coming on for the first time. How the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I am doing well. I'm ready to pick your brain about a team whose offseason I kind of like flip-flopped on pretty quickly. I was ready for the fireworks after KCP was poached on basically the first night. We were hosting Bleacher Report's free agency live show. And so Grant and I were ready for like the Orlando Magic to do caps lock stuff. And then that ended up being the extent of their stuff. So I'm excited to get into this team with you. Did you want to give, since this is your first time, any little background just about yourself, how you got into covering the Magic, how long you've been doing it now? I know it's been a couple seasons.
Yeah, so I started December 2022, just before the team went on their 6-game win streak. And yeah, before that, I was covering the Hornets for Storm and Sting. And then I was covering a different affiliation before that, which I don't really want to get into right now. But fortunately, I've known Dan throughout the entire process before I joined the Sixth Man Show, and we've stayed pretty connected afterwards as well. So I appreciate you bringing me on.
Oh, happy to get the chance to talk to you about this team. Like I said, you've been killing it with them. So I always appreciate your threads on Twitter. So may that account as we record this, it's suspended, which it happens to everybody. So screw FIBA is basically the moral of this story. So yeah. I wanted to start with you here. I think we have to look at what are your looking at the offseason in some, what are your thoughts on it and kind of what it says about their overall direction for this team?
Yeah, so I'll start by outlining my thoughts on KCP. I mean, as a former two-time champion, I mean, he not only adds championship pedigree, but I mean, I think one other thing we have to mention is he fits Orlando's mold to a T. I mean, he's a prototypical 3-and-D guard who fits seamlessly within Jamal Mosley's scheme, but he's also not a ball-dominant player. So during his stops in LA and Denver, he's been surrounded by other star-studded players in LeBron James, Nikola Jokic, and I've always appreciated his ability to complement those guys by spacing the floor and also like generating efficient looks off a ball screen or dribble handoff. And I know like we all like to make fun of Orlando's offensive structure just because of how broken and deteriorated it is, but they do have a few commonalities within Denver's scheme that I think KCP, once he's inserted into, is going to make this offense less dry. I mean, I believe he connected on 40.2% of his off-movement dribble handoffs last season, which off the dome, I believe, is good for the 18th best mark among the 77 players who took 75 of them. And his ability as a movement shooter pairs really nicely with one of Orlando's favorite tactics, a dribble handoff play they like to run called Chicago action. Typically, they usually run it with Wendell at the 5, but due to his injury concerns this past season, they ran it most frequently with Mo and Goga. So they'll have Suggs in the corner, and he'll receive a pin down screen for Paolo on the wing. And then he'll receive a DHO from either whoever's at the center spot at that point, whether that's Goga, Mo, or Wendell. And then he'll come around the top of the key and shoot that 3. But unfortunately for the Magic, their lack of movement shooting and minimal space, they're only able to generate one made 3 from that play of theirs. So you insert KCP into that play, and I believe that you've suddenly opened up a new sheer variety of options in that Magic playbook in itself. And then you can get funky and creative from there. And I think just I know I only said one example, but that in itself should make this bottom tiered offense harder to decipher come playoff time.
Were you and yeah, I mean, I don't think there's an argument against KCP's fit on this team. I mean, even it's like an embarrassment of riches thing defensively to where he was fringe. He made one of my all defense teams last year. He did not make all defense overall, but he was fringe all defense. And now you add that to a defense that was already second in points allowed per possession. And when you look at the sheer breadth of assignments that he was covering in Denver, but now he gets to play next to Jalen Suggs, it makes his job easier, or it'll make Jalen Suggs' job even easier to where if he wants to, go after even more turnovers away from the ball because KCP's on the court. So there's a lot of dynamic things they could do there. Were you surprised at all, though, especially given just, by the way, the other thing we have to shut out with KCP is that it's next level gamesmanship to me. I'm assuming this was part of the equation that you own Denver's draft pick and then you poach one of their most important players. That's just smart business right there, objectively. But were you surprised at all that this team didn't also go the route of, I'm not saying went after someone super splashy, but like, okay, we didn't add any type of real offensive organizer this season. Does that, one, like I said, were you surprised? But two, does it say anything about their, I guess, plans or level of confidence in not just, Anthony Black or Cole Anthony, but Jalen Suggs and Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner?
Yeah, I think most of all, it asserts their level of confidence in Anthony Black. And I was going to get into this later, but I think one of the biggest storylines I guess I'm following this season is Anthony Black's assertion as a lead facilitator in that bench role and Jalen Suggs in that starter role. I'll start with AB. I think with the loss of Joe Ingles, who assumed that role last season as the offensive hub between him and Mo Wagner's two-man game, I want to see if AB can inherit that responsibility off the bench in a lead creator role. And the idea of having a surefire point guard around to set the table has become the default, I think, around the league. But I think one of the most common misconceptions is making plays isn't the same thing as running a team. I know that's been an emphasis for AB. And through a pair of summer league games this past season, I thought he did a much better job of manipulating the defense. He's reading the help side defenders a lot better than he was a season ago. And he's finding players a step late or step too slow before he's making those high-level reads. So I think all that combined with the fact that both he and Jalen Suggs saw pretty much near non-existent usage from within their offensive playbook, specifically AB. I mean, Jamal Mosley did less than the bare minimum in helping create offensive pathways for him. Even his big Dallas offensive outburst, most of AB's scoring in that game came from having defend for himself versus having his number called within set plays. So I think adapting to the speed of the pro game is already a major struggle at first. And then you add seeing limited playing time, being thrust into the starting role, and then being primarily utilized to defend the opposing team's best guard, and then just not be rewarded within set plays, within the flow of an already, like we mentioned, pretty barren offensive playbook. It's rough. And I know on paper he played 69 games in his rookie season, but he only saw double digit in 50 of those games, I believe. And what a point guard needs most is time, patience, the water and sunlight of chances to fail, and then the structure and the opportunity to grow. Because if we go back in time, Jalen Suggs didn't have the greatest rookie season of all time. And now you can see that Orlando is presenting confidence in Suggs to take over that lead guard role. And then I want to see if AB can be able to do that off the bench as well.
Do you think that they're going to have the time and space for Anthony Black to do that, though, when you look at a team that, and it's a very interesting storyline to focus on just because they have immediate aspirations. Like they have time just because Paolo's not on his next contract yet. Even Franz signs his extension, but that doesn't kick in. This team is young, but like you made it to the playoffs and progress, of course, isn't linear, but like the idea is it's not win more games or make it further in the playoffs than last season, but it's have a better product at the end of everything. And there's a tug of war there where it's giving Anthony Black more runway to run things on the offensive end that will go a long way. And maybe they have enough spacing around him now where they might even feel more comfortable with him doing it. But when you also are a team that's like, you're supposed to be in the playoff conversation in the East. And I think some people even probably have them penciled in like the top 5 or top 4, just based off their defensive ceiling alone. How hard is it to juggle this idea that, oh, we want this sophomore to continue to develop at one of the most important like functional positions in the league. But hey, we also don't necessarily have the stomach for the growing pains to just like, oh, if he's out there and has a really bad game, can we, are we built to overcome that and let that ride?
I don't think it necessarily is. It doesn't necessarily have to be Anthony Black at the one and then give him the ball and everyone just get out of the way and let him create. He's a 6'7", 6'8" guard. He's a big guard, and there's a lot of things that he can do on the floor that doesn't necessarily equate to him having the ball in his hands. I mean, in that Cleveland matchup in the playoffs, Orlando ran inverted screens for Paolo Banchero 9 times. They didn't score a single point in game 1 through their inverted screen set. I mean, you put Anthony Black, and Anthony Black did a really good job of pairing with Paolo Banchero and weaponizing his ability as a screener in those inverted screen sets, in specific that game against New York at home in Orlando. And no guard on the Magic came close to sniffing more than 100 screen assists. So if you want to put Anthony Black as a primary screener for Paolo using his size, I think that in itself frees up a lot for Paolo. And one of the most common ways that he was able to do that this season, which we didn't really see a lot of because of his staggering minutes, whether he was playing or not playing, was the Magic were very successful when AB was screening for Paolo via wedge screens or pin-in screens. So I believe he's going to be critical for their potential playoff success if they want to advance and compete in the second round this season, whether that be the ball in his hands or other variations of him being involved in the offense and not just being thrust in the corner like he was last season, saying, hey, if you get the ball, just shoot it.
Do you trust, though, because that will be part of his role in certain sets, do you trust like the jumper to come along enough to where he's not? I think people sometimes confuse shooting and floor spacing to where like floor spacing is you could be like a not so great shooter, but defenses respect you. And I think when you go back and look at Anthony Black shot well from 3 last year, but it was on a negligible number of attempts. And you look at the way a lot of those were defended or the situations they came in, I wouldn't call it necessarily like caps lock floor spacing. How do you feel about sort of development of his, because that's going to be whether he's on the ball, off the ball, like the jumper is going to be something that needs to be a trustworthy weapon in his arsenal.
I expect the 3-point attempts not only for Anthony Black but for everyone else to increase. But I know the Magic, I believe they were 27th in 3-point attempts. But when people talk about 3-point attempts, I don't want you to just chuck up shots for the sole purpose of increasing those attempts, right? One of my biggest coaching icks is coaches' refusals to draw plays for certain players. I know we haven't touched on Gary Harris today yet, but throughout the playoffs as a veteran, he shot 7 for 22. 7 for 22 as a starter, whose sole purpose for being on the Magic was to provide 3 and D. He provided the D and no 3, and not one of those plays was a drawn up play for him in those 22 attempts. I mean, he's not coming off a veer screen. He's not coming off a twist, a punch strong curl, Oklahoma, Finland, double drag. All his attempts, every single one of them, were a result of kickouts. And so going back to your point, not only for Anthony Black, for the entire team, I want the attempts to increase, but I want more of an emphasis to be drawn on drawing up plays to create advantages and space for shooters, not just stashing them in the corner and then having them receive the ball off kickouts. It just hasn't worked, and I don't believe it's going to work the more you do it.
Do you think that could maybe be a function of their lack of trust in the actual like offensive accessories on this team, to where it's the way to generate good spacing around? And I'm just going to use this guy as an example because he's the most important player on the team. But like when you go back and look at just like Paolo Banchero drives and how much or like when he's in, like how much space this dude just not have to operate, you do organically kind of stretch defenses by having guys in the corners. And if you don't trust players to either run or execute the more complicated stuff, and look, they're dealing with a young team. We're talking about Anthony Black, Jalen Suggs just finished up year 3. So if you're not necessarily trusting those guys in those actions that you're outlining, it like, do you think that had to do with a level of concern or not even concern, but like we're still trying to feel out like what these young guys are going to be able to do? Or do you really think that it was just kind of like this functional cop out a little bit, that there should have been more complicated stuff being run?
Yeah, I think it's more of a functional cop out than the alternative. And some of it, like from a half court perspective, is that the team just wasn't, like you said, they just weren't running many complex plays to alter the defensive structure opposing teams are based in, because everyone coming into the night knew we're going to switch to blitz, Paolo and Franz, and everyone else on the corners. If they're going to beat us, they're going to beat us. We're going to live with that. But I think in a bird's eye view, I mean, pair the loss of their primary offensive play caller, Nate Tibbetts, came just a few weeks before the season had started, and he accepted a head coaching gig for the Phoenix Mercury with not a lot of time to replace him. And Jesse Mermis took over the play calling duties, and it didn't necessarily bore with leading, and it led to a lot of clunk. I mean, they don't have many secondary ball handlers either, so someone who can create their shot off the dribble aside from Cole, Paolo, Franz, and to a degree Jalen. So if and when their primary action didn't work, you were just left with, like you mentioned, a Paolo Banchero ISO, which was another direct result of his poor efficiency. And then I think AB, Jett, and the addition of KCP helps in that regard, because I believe all three of those guys are connective passers, and having more guys on the floor who can create advantages and provide relief options is just good for an offense that has been non-existent for we're going on about 2 seasons now.
So Franz Wagner gets the max with the language that could take it to a 30% max up from the 25% max. I want to start there with him. Are you, I want to use the word at all surprised? Like, they didn't even wait for it to get to restricted free agency. It doesn't seem like there was any hard negotiating going on. Just based off what we've seen from him, did you view him as a no-brainer max guy? And especially one where it's, I know we frame it as, well, teams welcome to pay these guys. Let's say he does make All NBA and the contract gets elevated to the 30%. In theory, you as a team, you're happy to pay that because of the leap that he just had. But like, part of the negotiation process and why restricted free agency exists is, well, like, couldn't you have just gotten this deal done at the bare minimum without that language in there, so that if he did have that type of leap, you're like, oh, we still have this guy at a 25% max. So I'll start it with this to throw my take out there. I would have made him wait, just because functionally, I know they're not going to be a cap space team moving forward, but you still would have had more flexibility. And I just don't know that he has shown enough for me to say this guy was a no-brainer opening of the offseason. Like, let's give him, I think he's a fantastic player. If you go back and look at some of the stuff I said about him defensively coming out of the draft, I look like a fucking idiot. So I recognize that Franz Wagner is a fantastic basketball player. I just found it, I think the word is probably interesting, fascinating, that this was done so quickly without, it seems like, any sort of just, well, we need, they have decided that he is our just number 2 guy. That's how I view it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I viewed it as well. And I think a reason why, I don't have any inside information when I say this, I think one of the reasons why it came so quickly is just to showcase Paolo Banchero and this new generation of Magic team that, hey, we're not going to operate how we did in the past with the other guys. And the Magic have the best young forward combination in the league in Franz and Paolo. So the writing for me was on the wall that this contract was coming. He's one of their cornerstone players. The contract reflects it, and the team is being constructed around both forwards' playmaking and versatility. He's also one of 4 other players in Magic history to eclipse 4,000 points before their 23rd birthday. I mean, he joins Elite Company and Tracy McGrady, Penny Hardaway, and Shaquille O'Neal. If his three-point shooting bounces back, in addition to what he already provides as a driver and a playmaker, who is extremely young and has showcased the ability to complement your all-star, I think it's a no-brainer.
What do you make of the actual jump shot? The stuff, by and large, the counters that he has inside the arc, he's like at this combination of force and finesse. He's terrific to watch. His year-over-year three-point percentage has declined. He has peaked on his jump shot percentage, I think, at like an effective field goal rate of 50.6 or something. That was in his sophomore season, not last year. What do you make of that? Are you notice anything mechanically? Is it, oh, this dude has played a lot of basketball over the past couple of years when you look at all the FIBA games? Is it also a function of, because we'll bring this up with, and it's, I want to use it as an excuse, but it's a reasoning I use for Paolo's efficiency, is look at the space in which he's working and look at the defensive attention he's commanding. If you had to just boil it down, though, to one factor, like what is the driving force for that? And is this something that it has to be something worth monitoring, but is it at all concerning when you kind of look at how the year-over-year efficiency has gone?
See, before I answer, I always whenever we're talking about shooting mechanics, I always like to ask like people who don't watch the team as closely as I do, because I feel like once you watch a team so closely, you just kind of, that form just becomes second nature to watching. So when you watch Franz, do you feel like his mechanics are off by any sense?
I won't pretend to be a jump shot expert. I will say the cadence at which he takes it, it does, and I don't know if this is a mental thing, but sometimes it feels like it slows down. And I don't know if it has to do with the action that the jumper is coming out of or the circumstances under which he's taking it. But that's the only kind of thing I've noticed. And then it does feel like there might be stretches where the shots are like, I don't even know how to describe them. I don't want to say so off, but it's almost, is this a function of tired legs? And is that because he's played so much basketball? Is it because what he's maybe doing defensively or the stuff that he has to do when he's actually on the ball? So that's honestly why I'm asking you, because I find it so curious that a player I view as talented as him, when you kind of look at the progression of, and again, he had like a pretty efficient season on his inside the arc jumpers, I believe, as a sophomore. I can't remember if I'm misremembering which campaign it was, but just a player at his level, you would expect to see like kind of more year over year improvement from. And I just don't know whether it's him or whether it's the environment in which the Magic have placed him these past few years.
Yeah, so he's always had an unconventional hip degree and shoulder to knee to toe alignment. I actually spoke to a shooting coach from UNC. I spoke to multiple shooting coaches and I showed them Franz's clips, and what I got was that his knee at his release motion are roughly at 93 degrees, and his hip degree lines up at 122 degrees. And what they told me was typically you're taught to ideally be at a 90 degree angle to allow yourself the most balance. So when he brings the ball up to his set point and releases through, he's recently lost his arc from his rookie season, and the shot has like kind of translated to almost looking like a laser, to where it has almost little to no arc. But it kind of like variations of it. But it was so noticeable over the course of the season that Franz worked alongside shooting coach Jeremiah Boswell to improve his arc. And they actually came up with the verbiage called tickle the stars, meaning when he would release, he wanted Franz to release it to the point where the shot would tickle the stars. It would be so high. And I understand the Orlando Magic spacing might be a result of that. So I went back and I looked at his Olympics percentages. And since the conclusion of the season and in the Olympics, he converted only 7 of his 35 three-point attempts in playing for Germany in the 4 FIBA games they played in the men's 2024 Olympics, which sits at 20%. Now, as bad as that number is, he did average 5.8 attempts in the Olympics, which kind of alleviates my concerns to a degree because it showcases the confidence he has in his shot, unlike Markelle Fultz, who won't even attempt to take a three-point shot despite how open he is. So I would say my concern level at this point is a result more of he's just played so much basketball. You go back to last summer, they played Eurobasket and they got gold, and then you go through a grueling season, and then you play a playoff game, and then you have a few weeks off before you're back in a training camp for Germany, and then you're competing in this grueling friendly games. You got multiple friendly games that start in July, and then all the way until almost just the tip of August, you're competing for the Olympics for your country. So I want to say that that's what that is, but give me another season before I'm really able to tell you exactly what's going on. But yeah, 20% after whatever he shot in the regular season, it's pretty barren, and his shot arc hasn't looked any better in the Olympics as well.
Jalen Suggs, also extension eligible. Do you think he gets an extension? And is there like if you're running the organization, like what is the walkaway number, the number that you look at Jalen Suggs, you look at his potential, and that you would be comfortable giving him?
I can't speak to a number I'd be willing to give him, but I do believe I 1000% expected him to get paid. I mean, throughout his tenure in Orlando, he routinely went out of his way to state his love and affection for the fan base in the city, as well as his desire to remain in the blue and white. I can't speak to where those conversations those contract conversations are at the moment. But if Jeff Weltman's desire is to see where a full season of Suggs running the team from a point guard perspective and being the answer to Paolo Banchero's needs of having a facilitator around him are, I don't have a problem with the Magic waiting it out in that sense until the following season to lock him in. So that's kind of where I stand with the Suggs contract at this point. But I do believe a deal will get done, whether that be by the deadline in October or next season.
Hopefully it doesn't happen before this episode comes out. That's all I'll say. So he's improved as a shooter, obviously. I don't think his passing improvement, it's not like super complicated stuff, but I definitely think that he has improved some of his live dribble stuff, some of his open floor stuff. What does the next frontier look like for Jalen Suggs?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to the passing for a second. I mean, when he took over the point guard role for Markelle Fultz, I mean, as I watched him progress in that role, he progressed as a passer. And now it's not some insane passing ability, but he got much better at using his eyes he got much better at weaponizing his eyes. Over the course of the season, he showed no fear in attacking zones and blitzes. I remember a play against the Chicago Bulls where Andre Drummond and Kobe White switched to blitz Paolo near the free throw line extended. And I'm watching Jalen Suggs using his vision before the ball even reaches him to scan the defense off ball. And once Paolo passed him the ball out of that switch to blitz, instead of letting an open three rip off the catch, which 9 out of 10 players would have done in that situation, he threw a dart mid-air to the low post for an immediate peg touch for Mo Wagner, which I found very impressive. And I believe him to be more of a quarterback on the court than an actual half-court point guard who can get you in and out of sets. But
I think I was going to ask whether you thought you had that in him, because I think that's the part of his game I look at and I'm like, if he could do that, it's honestly, it's course altering for both him and the franchise.
Yeah. No, I think he's more of a transition point guard and quarterback on the court type of deal. But I think the biggest kind of frontier for him is, you mentioned it earlier, but he no longer has to be Orlando's primary defensive anchor. I mean, you have KCP now allowing you to defend twos now versus last year in the playoffs where you're having to defend Donovan Mitchell, who's coming off double drags with both Jared Allen and Evan Mobley as a screener, is wearing you out as you navigate around those screens for a rear view contest. And I went back and I actually looked at Suggs' stats by quarter, because I do believe this is a real thing that I want him to improve at. In the first quarter, he was the second leading scorer for the Magic with 323 points. And coming out of halftime, he was the top 3 scorer for the Magic at 307 points. But in quarter number 2 and quarter number 4, where his motor kind of runs low because of all the defensive chaos he's causing, he only scored 176 points all season in the second quarter, which puts him at 4th. And in the fourth quarter, he totaled 131 points, which would put him below Cole Anthony and Mo Wagner at 5th in the closing quarter. So I believe in those quarters where you feel the mileage, you can have him take a bit of a backseat as a defensive pest and provide help if you're a non-spacer. Just his ability to be in that kind of context and take some of the regular season mileage off of him, because you have an all-defensive caliber veteran guard alongside you to take on those assignments in quarter number 2 and 4. So you're able to provide more of a lift offensively with the ball, will be a smooth transition for him and the remainder of the offense.
Paolo Banchero is, I'm sure you're aware of this, a somewhat divisive figure when we're talking from the national perspective, where this podcast stance is mostly he is #that dude. But I think a lot of people kind of glom on to his efficiency through the first couple of years of his career. And they're like, oh, look at his true shooting percentage. And he's never shot better than 34% from 3. What is the rebuke? We've made a rebuke to it. What is your rebuke? What is your response to it? Like, is it really I don't want to use the word simple, but like, look at the types of shots he's taking. Look at the defensive attention he's commanding. Look at the level of responsibility he has shouldered on the offensive end, not just as a shot maker and scorer, but just like the primary ball handler and facilitator and driver of the offense because of the players that have been in place around him. And then I also don't know how you watch the playoffs. Granted, it was, he's only there for 7 games, but it's his first taste of playoff basketball. And he's just an absolute monster, averaging 27 points, 4 assists, shooting 40% from three on real volume. I think I'm more so asking, like, is there any justification behind like the concern about his, you can look at the free throws and say, okay, it'd be nice if he made those at a higher clip, but I don't know how you look at the circumstances under which he has played his first 2 seasons. And I'm not saying throw it out the window, but kind of understand why his efficiency is where it is.
Yeah, no, all what you said, plus the fact that in his sophomore season, he was in the top 10 of most doubled players in isolation. And in those instances, I mean, he usually does a good job of hitting the gaps. I've never watched him and I felt like he isn't hitting the gaps. If the team is switching against him or ducking under him, I've been pretty okay with how quickly he's pulling up. And when he isn't pulling up, he's firing one-hand cross-court passes with Zion Williamson draped all over him to an open Gary Harris in the corner, only to watch Gary brick that wide open three-pointer. So as the season grew, I believe that both Jamal Mosley and Paolo Banchero got better in that regard. Following the All-Star break, there was a stretch of games against the Raptors and the Kings where the 2 guard, whether that was Gary Harris, but he was injured for a little bit, so Caleb Houston took that role. They would set a flex screen for Paolo to come off, flipping the sides of the block that he was on, immediately near the nearest wing defender, whoever that would be, would switch to blitz Paolo, and that would result in Paolo immediately passing to an open Franz Wagner or Jalen Suggs for automatic 3-pointers. So I think having a stationary and moving perimeter threat alongside the first-time All-Star is invaluable. With the addition of KCP, drafting De Silva, hopefully Jett Howard getting minutes this season, just giving him more reliable targets and an extra step defenses have to process before thinking about, let's blitz this guy without having it to be a direct causation of, every time we want to get Paolo open, we got to draw plays routinely for this guy.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see like the data on how many times he needs to give the ball up to then go out. Like if he's getting the ball in the elbow or in the post, and then there's like the doubles already there, he has to kick it back out, then go up and set a screen to get the ball back in a somewhat advantageous situation. It feels like he might be among the league leaders in like the amount of times that is needed to happen. And you don't want, I was going to ask you, like, what does the next frontier look like for him? And there's a bunch of things you could focus on. It might be a question of what does the next frontier look like for the Magic, to where maybe he doesn't always have to work so hard to get his points.
Yeah, no, like I said, I think you surround him with the invaluable addition of, like I said, KCP, drafting De Silva, hopefully Jett Howard getting minutes this season, just giving him more reliable targets and an extra step defenses have to process. Like I said before, we're thinking about, let's blitz this guy. But I think going back to your point about what the next frontier looks like for Paolo's so awesome that I think the next frontier for him has to do more with more mechanically and structurally. I want his comfort with the feel of the game and his relationship with Jamal Mosley to evolve. I think I saw both those things grow exponentially throughout the season, and it carried over into the playoffs. I remember watching a play while Franz was shooting free throws against the Cavs. I believe it was game 5. Mosley called for wide stack from the sideline, and from Paolo Banchero quickly motioned over to him and was like, I don't want to run wide stack right now. I want you to give me the Isaac Okoro matchup in isolation and just let me go to work. And behold, he went to score 3 consecutive times with Okoro as his defender, 2 of which were fading away jumpers. And I think in January, I want to say it was January 7th, against the Hawks, they were in a tip and nuck battle with the Atlanta Hawks with DeJounte Murray at the line. And Paolo called 77, which is Orlando's double drag play for, and he didn't call it for himself. He called it for Caleb Houston, with the team down 3. And so he was willing to station himself as a screener within that play to generate an open 3 in the corner for Houston, who did convert the shot, which eventually led to Orlando winning an OT over Atlanta. So I think just him and Jamal Mosley kind of getting a better feel for each other going into year 3 and going into what I believe will be another playoff experience will just be good for him. And I think that's the next frontier for him, more so in a sense of, because that space is, I do believe, is going to come. And I couldn't tweet this, but I guess I'll say it. Orlando is pivoting away from their offensive coordinator, Jesse Mermis, from last season, and they've made a few promotions from within. So I do believe their offense will look different next season.
What do you think will be the big, even like keeping it to Paolo? What do you, if you had to predict, or I know you've laid out sort of your hope, but like what will then be the biggest difference for how he's used?
I want him to be used as a screener more, because now,
him in space, like if you have like actual spacing around him with him as a screener with just the passing instincts that I think he showcased, like even like the live dribble stuff from him has been really, really good, especially last season. Yeah, I would be all for seeing more of that.
Yeah, I mean, almost every single time that he operated as a screener, whether that was against I remember one of the games against Toronto, he was having a terrible night. I think he was 4 for 11 or 4 for 13 or something crazy like that in the first half. And I remember shutting my computer off at halftime and saying that, damn, I want them to use Paolo as a screener to alleviate that pressure, because all Toronto was doing was just absolutely blitzing him. And lo and behold, to open the second half, they actually started Joe Ingles at point, and they just ran pick and rolls with Paolo as a screener, using Joe Ingles' 3-point shooting as a threat. And I think, given and provided the right offensive structure around Paolo, and assuming that Jett Howard does see minutes, and KCP and Gary Harris and Jalen Suggs all get better and evolve as 3-point shooters, and Franz's 3-point shooter comes along as well, the heights that Paolo's offensive structure can go to as a screener alone would be invaluable.
Do you believe this is more of just it's my own agenda? Do you believe in the step back from Paolo?
No, I do not believe in a step back at all. I genuinely,
you're a hater. Let's move on.
I genuinely despise seeing a step back, and I'll tell you the reason why I don't like seeing a step back. And maybe I'm just having like nightmares from watching what he did against the Kings and the Warriors. There were 2 instances this season, and it was down the stretch where they could have locked up a potential number 2 seed. And both times the Magic were down 3 against the Kings and the Warriors with about 1:15 left to go in the closing, in the final quarter of regulation. And I actually went back and I watched the tape today because I knew you were going to bring this up. With 16 seconds left on the shot clock, he took a step back 3, and they didn't run the play that was being called for on the sideline at all. And he did that multiple times over the course of the season. I'm just outlining 2 for you. So I just don't enjoy seeing him, especially take a step back 3, especially given the circumstances of those games.
I think so. You cover this team, watch them way more than I do, but my argument against that would be if he used it as a crutch to where it felt like he was in high volume, like kind of leaning on that too much. Like this isn't James Harden or Luka Doncic. There was that game. I can't remember which game it was against Cleveland, but like it's in the third quarter. The shot clock's at like 7 or 8. And like you now have this guy, he drains a step back, like with 4 or 5 seconds left on the shot clock from above the break. Like to have that in your arsenal. And it happens after surveying the floor for a couple seconds. He's not making it a dead ball. And if you were also watching, not you watching, like if we're watching his other 3-pointers, it's not like, oh, he's catching it and then has to like go into his dribble moves. I believe in it I believe in it so much because it feels like an interesting counter, or it's like when you look at what Nikola Jokic does, completely different players. I want to make that clear. But like he gets the ball, these grenades, what could be grenades all the time. And he just has the ability to get to the Sombor shuffle or throw off these ridiculous off balance jump shots that go in. And it's like, they're never a crutch. They're never a crux of his game. And I don't feel that way with Paolo. It feels more like, look, the percentages aren't there just yet. He shot like, I think he only made 1 step. The step back I'm actually referencing the playoffs might have been his only step back of the series that went in. But like to have that tool, and I think you look at just how comfortable he seems getting to it and the space that he kind of generates on it without too much effort. And he just has the size to shoot over guys to begin with. I'm just not used to seeing someone who's not a wing sized, like there are wings that are as tall as him, but he's built like a big, like an actual forward. And to see someone like that just get to a step back, and looking at how fluid it looks to me, I'm a believer in it. I'm not saying he needs to take 5 a game, but I believe. My next question for you is can we go through some of the younger guys? You already talked about Anthony Black. So I think there are 2 more that stand out just to see what type of role you think they might have or general impressions you have of their game. And I think we'll believe. Let's begin with Jett Howard, who just didn't play meaningful minutes for them last year, spends a lot of the time in Osceola. And I was writing something a couple months ago where I watched a bunch of what Jett Howard was doing. And I was like, I don't want to say I'm miffed why he wasn't playing for like the bigger club, but he was doing a lot of the stuff that it felt like their offense could have needed and might have opened things up for everybody else. And so do you see him, even with the infusion of KCP, like getting the opportunity to have at least a somewhat regular role this season?
So yeah, no, I'll speak on Jett and De Silva at once. And like you just alluded to, what the Magic offense needs and what Howard and De Silva both can provide go hand in hand as ideal fits. And watching Tristan in Summer League and Howard throughout his rookie season at Osceola, even when the biggest thing that stood out to me about both players was even when both players aren't doing something, they're still doing something due to the gravity that they command on the floor in itself. In Summer League, the Magic utilize stack screen actions and another play called twist, but within their stack screen set, they ran it twice with Jett on the floor and De Silva not on the floor, and with De Silva on the floor and Jett not on the floor. But anyways, they'd have either guy set the stack screen, and then Jay Scrub is the ball screener with AB rejecting the ball screen. And when AB would go away from it multiple times, it would just become a simple rip for Scrub to go to the rim. And with one defender to guard 2, and both times when the Magic ran it against the Cavaliers opening night on Summer League, both defenders traveled with the shooter, which was Jett or De Silva. So I think that in itself, and then that left Scrub wide open under the rim. I think you pair that with how important De Silva and Jett Howard are as ghost screeners, and it's those type of advantages I imagine that Orlando can bring to the offense to provide it that lift.
So do you think like De Silva specifically, do you think like he's going to get any run with that's sort of like, well, if we have to phase out a Gary Harris type situation, because you look at his roster, it's deep. And so you could say, yeah, they'll find minutes for them, but like, who are those minutes coming at the expense of?
So Gary signed an $8 million contract and he has a team option. So I believe, again, I don't know what De Silva's minutes are going to look like. I think if last season is any repertoire of what's going to happen this season is, I would want to say Osceola, but you also have to understand that he's older than AB and Jett. So putting Tristan De Silva in Osceola at 23 years old would just, I don't know how that would bode well for the Magic, but I think what they'll do is they'll play Gary Harris up until the trade deadline and flip him and if they flip him at the deadline, maybe De Silva gets phased back in to replace Gary Harris. I just don't know what that looks like, but I do believe that Jett Howard will be in the rotation.
The good thing about hosting a podcast is I get to push my own agendas. And one of my biggest pet peeves with this team for the past couple of years is I would like them to play faster. They are very good at really capitalizing off turnovers. You look at the overall transition frequency, you look at them trying to push off live rebounds. I mean, let alone after makes. I couldn't even believe it was this low when I was prepping an outline for this podcast, that they were 29th in average offensive possession time. And I think it feels like low hanging fruit to me, and I think the responsibility could fall on a bunch of different people. Like sometimes Paolo feels like he could attack quicker and like be in semi-trend. It doesn't have to be, we get caught up in like pace and like transition frequency in raw terms. Semi-transition stuff is fine with me. It just feels like when you're going to go the route you are, even if you think that Anthony Black can have a bigger role, even if you trust Paolo's passing, Franz and Jalen, even if you trust all these guys, like, don't they have the personnel to play faster? Was this like they don't? It just feels like when you have a deficit in terms of if you were looking for a proven game manager, even if you don't want to play that way, like a way to overcome that while you're trying to figure out all this other stuff. And you mentioned a lot of it towards the beginning of the podcast or previously of things that they could implement, things that they might implement. It just feels like that might be one of the forms of low hanging fruit this team should be gobbling up moving forward. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And it doesn't make sense for a team that young to be that slow. So I understand. So I understand it from that perspective. But like I said, given how young a lot of the players are, a lot of the players also haven't fully digested the entire playbook. And then we've kind of spoken about how the playbook flipped from it being run from Nate Tibbetts to Jesse Myers kind of just before the season was about to start. So there would be a lot of times when timeouts would happen, or even within transition, where Franz is putting up his finger and he wants to run pistol, but Paolo's attacking downhill. So there's always been a lot of like miscommunication because not everyone seems to be on the same page, because not everyone understands the playbook to the same degree. So I think given another year, kind of bringing back the same entire team, aside from Joe Ingles and Markel Fultz and a veteran addition KCP, I think another year under some structure, under the same offense, under the same coordinators will bode well, and we'll flip that 29th into something more digestible.
We already talked about the 3-point volume, and I do agree with you that you shouldn't just get them up for the sake of getting them up. But I think we both expect them to take more threes. But is there a player that you look at their game or on this roster? And we know KCP is going to infuse kind of his own type of volume, but is there a player you look at that was already on the roster and say, like, they have the talent, they have the ability to just get up more threes? Or do we kind of focus on the primary guys that, like, Jalen Suggs might have room to go up a little bit with the way he was shooting the ball and the way he's kind of used off it on offense at points, but like, should Paolo or Franz, is that something that part of their game are like, oh, hey, like those threes probably need to come up too?
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I genuinely believe that everyone's 3-pointers attempts need to come up. And I think provided with the correct offensive structure and assuming that it's not going to just be predominantly in transition, we're going to dump it off to you on a delay, or in transition, I'm going to drive in the paint and then kick it out to you in the corner. I think all those components pile up into one will increase the attempts to make the 3-point attempts more digestible. Because what are they at right now? 27th in volume. And like I said, with the addition of Jett Howard, KCP, I expect the volume to rise in itself.
Wendell Carter Jr. had a weird season. I know it was marked by injuries, but there was like a point, and it was funny that people, I feel like, latched onto this for too long because it was just sort of like a flicker in the Magic schedule where it was, oh, is Wendell Carter Jr. expendable because look at what Gogo Batadze is doing. And just like, oh, good, Batadze eventually became an afterthought. Aside from stay healthy, what does he kind of need to do to make sure that he doesn't, Wendell Carter Jr., that is, fade into the background? Because there's a lot of games where you watch and it's just like you don't feel him as much. And was that, because you've mentioned sort of the offensive playbook turnover, was that at all like a byproduct? It was like, okay, he's injured and they're kind of already incorporating all these new things. And so other people are uncomfortable, but he seemed to have, and Wendell Carter Jr. is a podcast favorite. So I love Wendell Carter Jr., but like he had such a disjointed season. What is it that you're monitoring to like see that he can, it's not even improve upon, like to make sure that that doesn't happen again, where it's that uneven of a year?
So yeah, he got stymied out of the playbook completely. You're completely right about that. The Magic, they ran a lot of offensive structure around him in 2022 with him operating as a hub. I mean, he's their best center, and the role he played modeled that of the Celtics in Kristaps Porzingis, the Kings and Domantas Sabonis, the Nuggets and Nikola Jokic, and to an extent, Draymond Green of the Warriors. All those teams surround their big men facilitators with shooters in constant motion and cutting actions. And what they did a season ago, not this season, was just let Wendell operate as the 5 in a lot of delay action in 5-out structure. And we didn't see any of that this season. And I think we've forgotten how vital it is to have a big man who can make those quick decisions and find teammates making good cuts. If the primary goal is to have an offensive game plan that prioritizes off-ball movement on the wings, which Orlando does. But I think this is the biggest thing that is a result. The biggest toll his health took was it it stymied into his lack of aggressiveness on the boards. He wasn't being aggressive on the boards after he came back from his injury. He wasn't dunking the ball as frequently as he would used to. I remember watching that they played the Hornets, and he was wide open with, I think, Vasa Mui.
Vasily Miche.
Yeah, with him under the rim, and he went for a layup, like a tip-in layup, instead of just pounding a dunk over a much smaller Charlotte defender, and it resulted in a miss. And there's been so many times this past season after he came back from his hand injury where he's just botched wide open layup attempts instead of just jamming with authority. And we're not seeing any of those bone crushing screens that he used to provide to give Paolo and Franz space. When he sets screens, those defenders just go through like there's no screen even being attached in front of them. You wouldn't even know that there's a 7-footer who's trying to screen with how often smaller guards were able to just navigate away from his screens. And these, a lot of times, not really the best defenders either. So I think a lot of it just has to do with health, and then just giving him the opportunity to earn back that trust and allowing him the chance to, like I said, make those quick decisions that he was in 2022 and find teammates making good cuts, assuming that their offensive goal is still to prioritize off-ball movement off the wings.
I think this is more of an overarching question about how they'll approach the big man situation specifically, but they have a lot of different players and looks they could get to when you look at Wendell Carter Jr., having Jonathan Isaac. They have Mo Wagner, who also, like, I don't know, like once every third game just does something where it seems like Mo Wagner should be a superstar and not Mo Wagner. They have Goga Batadze still on this roster, of course. Like, what is the hierarchy in terms of importance with this big man structure? And is there a way to, like, with Wendell Carter Jr. specifically, let's say, like, does it maybe make more sense to, like, should you be staggering him more from Paolo? And so, like, you play him, so, like, you can run more of the offense through him, and maybe that's where he's going to be more at home, and you could take an additional, I know they went to it at some points last year, but, like, you could take a look at Isaac and Wendell Carter Jr. in your front court. And is there a look as, like, a primary lineup that you prefer? Like, do you view Wendell Carter Jr. as, like, well, this is, like, the guy that they need to have for their core lineups, or are you more intrigued by, let's say, having Jonathan Isaac in the front court with Paolo Banchero? Because I find this, and maybe I'm overrating it, but I find this to be like a fascinating subplot of just like, it's not going to necessarily define their future, but they have a lot of different options that they could go to when you're looking at how they structure the big man rotation, how they structure the 4-5 in general. And I'm just wondering who you kind of view as like, or most likely to become like the center mainstay. And then, of course, hovering over all this, we mentioned Wendell Carter Jr.'s health. It's how healthy will Jonathan Isaac be, and how many games will he play? How many minutes can he shoulder? So maybe I'm like the only idiot that finds that sort of interesting, but this feels like an intriguing subplot of this Magic team.
So yeah, no, the center mainstay is going to be Wendell Carter Jr., regarded that he is able to stay healthy. But the only time so there've been times where they have played Jonathan Isaac at the 5, and they experimented that in the Milwaukee Bucks game to close the season, which went really, really well for them. And then Jamal Mosley kind of used that in the playoffs before he eventually had gone back to Wendell Carter Jr., just because the Cleveland Cavaliers were just playing off of Jonathan Isaac in the corner. And now you're kind of playing 4-on-5 with Isaac just not being as big of an offensive weapon as Wendell Carter Jr. is. So I think the hierarchy of the centers kind of stays the same, with Wendell Carter Jr. being your mainstay. And then you can put J.I. in at the 5. I would put J.I. in at the 5 in crunch time if you're down by 5. I mean, if you're up by 5 and you need defense, I think you can have a lineup of the same 4 with J.I. swapping out Dell at the 5. And then in the result that you're up by 5 in crunch time, the starters just remain the same. But then I think it's, like I said, Wendell and then Mo and then Goga. And then Jonathan Isaac subbing in at the 5 in those crunch time closing minutes when they want to go to their quote unquote death lineup.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. Who do you view, though, as, just looking at next season specifically, as sort of more important to this team, or is going to have more of an influence over how they're faring? Is it someone like a Cole Anthony, who we haven't really talked about yet? You mentioned tangentially, like, well, his shot making and creation ability is important. Or Jonathan Isaac. They play two very different positions, but as guys who are most likely coming off the bench, like, who do you view as kind of more mission critical to this team's success right now?
I think given the addition of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and the offensive what he brings offensively, I would say Jonathan Isaac is more of a weapon for Orlando than Cole Anthony is. And funny enough to bring up Cole Anthony, he fits Orlando like a sore thumb. I mean, this team is employed by people listed at 6'5" and over, and multiple players who can be involved in pick and rolls, switching to blitz, boxing in one, and all kinds of defenses that defensive coordinators salivate for. And then you have Cole Anthony, who's listed at 6'3" and was getting played off the floor against the Cleveland Cavaliers because JB Bickerstaff kept targeting him in pick and rolls, both he and Joe Ingles.
I mean, if that is true, though, then if it's true that J.I. is more important, it feels like this, I kind of wondered if, and they could certainly do this they could do it on offense and defense, but like, in my head, I'm like, Anthony Black can be viewed as kind of like the secondary wing. And now I'm kind of like, your view of Cole Anthony and even kind of the offense at large, it feels like, well, like, no, Cole Anthony might just be like a lot more important than I thought he was going to be this upcoming season to what they're trying to do. So what is a strength of this team that we have not talked about yet that maybe you think flies under the radar?
I wouldn't say that it's not being talked about enough, but I haven't heard Jamal Mosley's name mentioned within the addition of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And the reason I say that is the league essentially allowed one of the best defensive minds in the league to now add another infinity stone to his death lineup as he continues to stash the best defensive players in the league with Jalen, Suggs, KCP, and Jonathan Isaac, who I think a lot of people believe is another all-defensive name, given he can remain healthy for the 65-game requirement. And thinking out loud about all the defenses that Orlando can run to mess up opposing offenses' game plans with the personnel is just so fun.
What do you view as so moving on to like the weaknesses portion of this, or the bigger need? It'd be nice if they could get this wrapped into one player, but is it kind of just like that not even primary, but like that floor general element? Or is it like someone who can make shots, not just from the outside, but like create those shots for themselves as well?
Yeah. I want their biggest need and their biggest weakness last season was when a play breaks down, whether that be Paolo, Franz, or whether that's a play being run in the timeouts and one of the players just completely messing up that play. How can I make something of that play? Because like I said, they just never had a secondary ball handler, someone who can create their shot off the dribble. And we don't know if Jett Howard can be that guy. I believe KCP can be that guy. Cole Anthony has done it to a degree. Jalen Suggs has done it. But I think you need to have someone in that kind of third sense after Paolo and Franz, if and when the primary action doesn't work, to leave you with something so you're not left with the Paolo or a Franz isolation with the shot clock winding down, which was another direct result, like I said earlier, of Paolo's poor efficiency, because when a play breaks down, everyone's just giving it to Paolo and saying, hey, can you just bail us out real quick? So I think that's what they need, and that's what AB, Jett, and KCP will provide. And I think aside from that, just having a lot of connective passers and having more guys on the floor who just understand where to be and when to be when a play breaks down is just so vital to this team's offensive success.
Do you think that this team, let's say that the solve isn't on the roster, it's not happening by mid-year, do you think that they are operating on a timeline that would, I don't want to use the word mandate, but suggest that they'll be aggressive to pursue said upgrade or upgrades or whatever, like at the deadline? Because like I mentioned at the top of this podcast, they're not, I guess, not a rare team. There's been other teams in this situation, but like their core is young, but like they are up against immediate expectations because of how many games and how well they played last year. And because, I think a lot of people with Oklahoma City when they were pushing for them to make moves. It was, well, we need to see like what their weaknesses are once they get to the playoffs. And it's like, okay, Oklahoma City saw that and then addressed it. Orlando maybe got there a little bit quicker. Like it was Paolo's second season, but it was, they kind of struggled against the Cavs the exact ways that we expected them to struggle in that setting. And so it feels like they have that information. And if the roster doesn't resolve it and the addition of KCP doesn't help it enough, would you think that that's something they would seriously look? And I'm not talking about like waiting for the buyout market or making some sort of just throwaway trade, but do you think that this organization has a high enough view of itself internally in the immediate to be looking for a consequential upgrade if it needs it? Or is that, no, they're going to let this play out again, they're more likely to make any seismic or bigger time changes over the offseason of 2025?
So I do believe that they will be aggressive given the player presents itself. So like the team has gotten where they are through several years of calculated decisions, albeit small or large, that have given Orlando the optionality that the team has had recently. So like I said, like you said, there was no more enjoyable stage in a team's life cycle than where the Magic were this past season. But this front office has continued to approach things very cautiously. However, I do believe they pull the trigger when the right time presents itself. I just don't believe laying out all the chips for an aging Paul George, a Tyus Jones, a Klay Thompson can be characterized as a quote unquote lack of aggressiveness. And I'm not saying that that's what you said, but given that they have Gary and Mo on those team options, I wouldn't be shocked to see those two get dumped at the trade deadline to land a bigger fish, to help land them a bigger fish. But I think just that player, whoever that player is, just needs to present themselves. And like I said, it takes two to tango in trades nowadays. So that player's got to present themselves. He's got to want to go to Orlando, and Orlando's got to be willing to fish out the pieces to acquire that player.
I think they need to be even more open-minded than that, because if the player's under contract for multiple years, I don't care if they want to be in Orlando or not. Like, you come there and you sway them by winning basketball games. We've seen it done before. And I think the other thing with them, and Magic fans have given me pushback for how hard I've been on the fact that they weren't more aggressive in doing something like that yet. The reason that I'm so for it is, one, I think that they're good enough to where even if you want to look at the lay of the land and say, I don't know if we want to go all in yet, like we're kind of waiting for these other contenders to fall off a little bit. The thing that really stands out is like they don't need one specific player to where it's like, just like if it was a team where it's, oh, like you need LaMelo Ball for it to make the difference that you needed to make. And it's no, like if they got a Malcolm Brogdon, it could be an Anthony Simons, it could be a Colin Sexton, it could have been a Tyus Jones in free agency, although he wouldn't have, I don't think, fit with sort of their lineup flexibility motif. Maybe they're waiting on an opportunity that we just haven't discussed yet, where it's like, oh, does Bogdan Bogdanovic become available, or does a Darius Garland or a Kobe White, even Kobe White be great for this team? They can go so many different levels of player. Like, you don't even need to get into the specific names to be like, it could be, if it's a star that fits, okay, great, sure, or someone who has that ceiling, but it could also just be like, maybe like on another team, like maybe this guy winds up being our 6th or 7th most important player, but like getting someone who does that stuff that you're outlaying, it makes such a huge difference for this team because they're so good in all these other respects.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But the pushback of why I believe they won't go out and get a player is because the front office has come out and said multiple times that they don't want specialists. And a lot of the players that you listed are specialists. Like Bogdan Bogdanovic is a specialist. He specializes in three-point shooting. And understandably, it is a need for the Orlando Magic.
I mean, that's underselling Bogdan Bogdanovic quite a bit. And like, if you consider Bogdan Bogdan, I'm saying about the Magic, not you. If they consider Bogdan Bogdanovic a specialist, I don't really
meant that in the regards of the defensive caliber that they have on their team. I mean, Cole Anthony's a microwave scorer and he can't defend. No, I'm not saying Cole is better than Bogdanovic or Bogdanovic is better than Cole, but a lot of the times, even when Cole had it going, very rarely did we see him close games. I mean, there were games where I thought that he should have been gifted the opportunity to close the game, and he just wasn't, just because he would get eviscerated in pick and rolls, and we saw that in the playoffs, saw that in the regular season. So I think Jamal Mosley's biggest fear is to acquire a player who doesn't fit his defensive identity. So I think a lot of the pushback of why they're not going out and getting an Inferni Simons is due to that regard.
You're built to insulate one player like that.
I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm saying at some point in your life cycle, you have to give up some defense to acquire offense to help your stymied offense. But we just don't. I've never found. I haven't seen the willingness to do so. And like I said, if they play Jett Howard, if they play Tristan de Silva, if they play KCP, it'll be a step in the right direction. But I think they believe they hit the jackpot by landing KCP, who's a 3-and-D guy. Like I said at the top of the podcast, he fits their prototypical 3-and-D guy kind of wing. But they just don't seem to be in a position where they're willing to give up defense for offense. And that's a big reason why we saw Jett Howard in Osceola his entire rookie season. And it's come to a point where every single time that he speaks to the media, he never talks about offense anymore. He only talks about defense. So
that's good gamesmanship by him.
Yeah, it's good gamesmanship by him. But Jamal Mosley's entire identity has become defensive oriented. So if you're not willing to play defense, if you don't want to play defense, if you cannot play defense, you will not be in Orlando. And there's just been no evidence given to me where I can sit here and tell you otherwise, which is why I'm saying that I just don't believe that that's going to happen under Jamal Mosley.
Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of this podcast?
I'm ready.
What does this team's top 10 rotation look like at full strength for you?
Okay. So I think we can pencil in the starting lineup being Jalen Suggs at the point guard, KCP being at the 2, Franz at the 3, Paolo at the 4, when a healthy Wendell at the 5. And then I think your bench is consumed of Jonathan Isaac, Anthony Black, Cole Anthony, Jett Howard,
and
Mo Wagner.
I like that you think that Jett Howard is going to get like a real opportunity. I think that's a smart move by them, because I would have had because it will be coming at the expense of some vets minutes, but I think you're at the point where it's all right. You made the moves that you made. If you want to see if you have somebody who's going to address what you need internally, and I guess if he's focusing on defense and you don't want to compromise that in any way, you have to roll the dice and give him real reps, and it's better to find out sooner rather than later. So I actually hope you're right. I would have had Gary Harris penciled into that spot just because of the veteran sort of going the diplomatic route of it all. But the approach you're taking is the one that I 100% agree with.
The reason I said Jett over Gary Harris is a couple reasons. Number one being, I think people don't understand that after this season, Jett only has one more season until he's due for his rookie contract extension. And if I'm Jett Howard's agent and he doesn't get any minutes this season, that's going to be a real problem to me, because there's just no way an agent is just going to sit there and just allow a lottery pick to not play 2 seasons going into his rookie contract extension that 3rd season. And then we're also coming off of Gary Harris shooting 7 for 22 in the playoffs. And like I mentioned, of those plays, Jamal Mosley never drew up a single play for Gary Harris. He didn't come, like I said, he didn't come off a veer. Just all his attempts were as a result of kickouts, and the defense that he provided was really the only reason that he was kept in the lineup, on top of his veteran presence in the playoffs. So I think if we're going to start this season fresh, I do believe that they'd phase out Gary Harris's minutes to give Jett Howard an opportunity. And if that defense isn't all that, and if Jett Howard isn't willing to play defense, if he's getting targeted in pick and rolls, I do believe that Gary Harris finds his way back into the rotation. But to start off the season, I'd like to see Jett Howard be given that rotational minutes and have him give him every opportunity to succeed until he's given you nowhere to go but back to Gary Harris. I just don't believe you can go to Gary Harris and then go to Jett Howard, then go back to Gary Harris. I'd rather it be seamless. You start with Jett Howard, and then you go back to Gary Harris. And then if Jett Howard wants to say anything, if his agent wants to say anything, you say, hey, we started the season with Jett Howard. We gave him the chance to have rotational minutes. We gave him a whole season in Osceola to develop his defense. He played summer league. We liked what he saw. He came back in. He earned the right to be given those rotational minutes, and he was just getting targeted and pick and rolls defensively. Despite what he offers us offensively, we just can't continue to move forward with him. So we wanted to go back to Gary Harris.
Well, it's also for the, you mentioned the Jett Howard, like in the agent stuff. It's also for the Magic's benefit just to know, like, we have this information, this works, it doesn't work, and let's make the decision from there. What is it's obviously to some extent matchup dependent, but what should be the go-to or the most used crunch time unit for this team?
Oh, I think their most used closing lineup last season was the same starting lineup with Dell at the 5 and Suggs and Harris at the 1 and 2 with Paolo and Franz at the 3 and 4. I certainly don't expect that to be the case this season, but I think it's situational. Are you in crunch time and you're up by 5 or down by 5? Like I said, if up by 5, I'd include JI in at the 5 and swap out Dell. And being down by 5 and I need more offense, I would just result back to the starting lineup with Jalen, Suggs, KCP, Paolo, Franz, and Dell. Just due to the sole purpose that Dell provides more offensively than Jonathan Isaac does.
Do you think if you're looking for this team to play a little bit faster, though, do you think Isaac would fit that motif better than, like, looking at the offensive end? I know Wendell's a more dynamic player, but if you're trying to, erase a deficit in a small amount of time, does he prohibit you from playing maybe as fast as you want that team to play in those situations?
No, Wendell isn't slow. He doesn't.
Oh, no, I don't mean to make like he's a plotter, but like JI still has sort of that different element to it.
Yeah, no, he definitely does have a different element to it. I won't counter you on that. I just think that given what we saw of how we looked at the 5 against Cleveland, like I said, I think it's matchup dependent as well. Like if you're playing a Cleveland team and you're down by 5, or like I said, you're up by 5, I wouldn't want Jonathan Isaac playing against Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. I would rather just have Wendell, and then I would have JI to counteract that twin tower alignment that they have in Cleveland, and then have it be Suggs, KCP, or Suggs, Franz at shooting guard, and Paolo, and then JI at the 4 and Wendell at the 5. But in a normal circumstance where a team like you're not playing Cleveland where they have 2 bigs, I would have JI at the 5 and swap him out with Dell.
What's a weird or funky or just offbeat lineup you would like to see this team try?
Normally, I would come in here and say, give me all the defense. Like, give me Jalen, Suggs, KCP, Franz, Jonathan Isaac, and then Wendell. And we're like, we can just bench Paolo because JI and Wendell are better defenders than him. But given Orlando's offensive structure, give me all shooters in this case, if we can. Let's go Jett Howard at point guard. At shooting guard, we can go Gary Harris. At small forward, we can go KCP. At power forward, we can go Tristan de Silva. And then at center, we can go Wendell.
I would
if you want to get real funky.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of youth in there too, because you have Jett Howard and Tristan de Silva in there.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it. I would lean towards 5 out as well, but I would like take a different element to it. Like, give me Paolo at the 5, surround him with. I'm going to trust Suggs' shooting, so I'm going to play him with KCP and Jett Howard. So we're opening up the Magic defensively there.
So what we're doing is we're doing FIBA Paolo, where Steve Kerr was having him play at the 5.
Yeah, FIBA Paolo, but I think that, I mean, with Suggs on the court and KCP, like, I think the defense probably ends up being better. I guess you could quit, and I don't know. Paolo at the 5 is not something I ever think needs to become a crutch, but I think that dude could pretty much do anything. I have such a high opinion of him. I don't know how I'd finish the lineup. Just put the Silva in there. I'm putting 2 youngsters in here, so it'll never happen. But throw him in there. So you're small, but you're not small. So it's like you have Paolo at the 5, KCP and Suggs. Go with De Silva and then throw Jett Howard in there. And so it's like that's your quote unquote small ball lineup, but you're not really that small.
So it's the same lineup as mine, but you took out Paolo, but we're putting in Paolo instead of Wendell.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably talk me into like Caleb Houston instead of De Silva, or maybe
Oh
even
my goodness, I forgot about Caleb Houston.
I mean, like if I really cared about I just don't know if I trust Cole Anthony enough. Gary Harris has been all over the place the past few years. It looked like he was having a renaissance in Orlando, and then as you mentioned, the playoffs happened. Yeah, I don't. The fifth one is oddly tough. I mean, it should. Let's be honest. It should be Franz. And so, like, if you trust in Franz as a jumper, there, it's okay. Make him the fifth. So give me Paolo with the 5 with Franz, Jett Howard, KCP, and Jalen Suggs. But I'm thirsty to see like better floor balance from this team, and so that lineup definitely gives you it.
Yeah, I just don't see it. I don't see anywhere where either of these lineups will ever be portrayed at the same time on the
That's
floor.
the whole point of this exercise. We're allowed to have fun here. Don't harp on it too much. So as we're recording this, their over-under is set at 47.5. Are you taking the over the under on that? And how many wins do you ultimately see them getting? Where do you see them landing in the Eastern Conference, that whole spiel?
You said 47.5 is their over under?
Correct. As of August 19th.
I'll take the over. I'll put them at exactly 50 wins. I think that's a 3-game improvement from last season, I believe.
Yeah, 3-win improvement, which we talked about this with this team. Not me and you, Grant and I talked about it when we were doing like sort of better or worse exercise. They're like the quintessential. We have to remember progress isn't linear. So that I think we both picked them to win more games anyway, but like they could win 46 and just still be better equipped to win in the playoffs. But their over-under is like fascinating because I think, look, if Cleveland's healthier, if Indiana doesn't deal with a Tyrese injury, you have the Knicks, you have presumably a better / healthier version of the Sixers. The Celtics are going to be right there. I don't trust the Heat still. So it's just, they're like in that gaggle of just like there are 6 teams, I feel like, in the East where you could see any outcome, or I guess 5 because Boston just feels like pencil them in for the top. But there's those 5 teams that you could talk me into any order in this. Like if you told me the Magic had the 2 seed, I'd be like, okay, like I'm not going to flinch at that. I'm not going to predict it, but I'm not going to flinch if you told me that's what happened. So this team certainly, I think, has a high immediate ceiling. I'll just be curious to see how it all kind of translates and whether they have developed enough, have done enough, and will run enough stuff to like they need to materially improve this offensive attack. And I think that like if you're going to enter 50-win territory and they do that without like a league average-ish offense at bare minimum, that would be absolutely shocking to me.
Yeah, no, I think the Magic are at a point where even if they were to dip below 47 wins, I wouldn't necessarily view them as a worse team from last season because like you said, like there's a lot of variations that go into why you've won less games than you did the season before. The Magic were dealt with a lot of injury luck. A lot of time, there were multiple times. There was a batch of games. They never played the Miami Heat at full strength ever. Jimmy Butler missed 2 games. Bam Adebayo missed another game. And then when they played the Bucks, one time they were without Giannis. Another time the team was without Damian Lillard. Joel Embiid's health is also a common question for the Philadelphia 76ers. So I think the Magic are at a stage in their life cycle where if they were to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and just as long as they avoid the play-in, I wouldn't necessarily delineate this season's success despite lesser wins as a worse season. Because once you start the playoffs, you're on a clean slate again, and the team is structured to, I believe, advance in the first round easier than they were the season prior to. So as long as they can get to the playoffs and avoid the play-in, I don't necessarily think that having 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55 wins necessarily will make me come back next season and say, oh, hey, the Orlando Magic were just so much better. I think progress for the Orlando Magic is, can you get past the first round and can you put up a fight in the second round? And what does that fight look like? And who did you lose to in the second round? And who did you beat in the first round to get to the second round? I think that's the kind of life cycle that we're in at this point.
Is there anything else or anyone else on this team about this team that I didn't ask you about, we didn't talk about, that you think we need to discuss before I let you skedaddle?
Nope.
Dope. You just made it through your first appearance on Hardwood Knocks, Fawzan. How do you feel?
I feel good. This was also my second podcast I've ever done.
I still find that wild. we got to tell more podcasts, invite you on. The Twitter handle's on screen in the podcast and YouTube description. And speaking of that, can you just tell our listeners where they can find you and all the content that you're putting out?
Well, I'm praying that you can still find me on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. My account was suspended due to FIBA regulations. Twitter, if you're listening to this podcast, Elon, if you're listening to this podcast, please unsuspend me from Twitter. If not, I'm going to just have to create a new account. I don't know what that's going to look like at this point, but if you are on Twitter and my account is active, my account is listed on the bottom right, FAWZANAMER_, and you can find my work at the6manshow.com. Go hit up my guys. I work for the 6-Man Show podcast. Go hit them a follow as well, and you can find all my work there.
Thanks so much, and rest assured I'll be pestering you again in the future. So thanks for your time and insight, man.
Appreciate you, Dan.